Hey guys, it's Joel from guntoter.org. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about Meshtastic for iPhone. Now before we get into that, if you go down in the corner, like, share, subscribe, hit those notifications, and also go down below in the description and check out our Patreon page. We do have 3 levels of patron now, including with some benefits for 2 of the 3 levels. So if you could go check that out and help us out monetarily, that would be awesome, because everything that we review here we do by ourselves. We don't get anything for free. There's 2 reasons for that. The first reason is that we can give you the most bias-free reviews that we can, because we're not being paid to give you a review. We're not getting free stuff to give you a review. And it also allows us to kind of follow your ideas. Like if you have ideas for stuff you want us to review, we can go and do that instead of having to worry about somebody who sent us something and having to get a review out on their item. So it really gives us some freedom, and that's why we like to buy the stuff ourselves to review it, and also why it would really help us out if you could contribute. Now with all that said, let's talk about why you're actually here, which is to talk about Meshtastic on the iPhone. Not going to go too deep into how like mesh networks work, because that's something you can Google elsewhere on YouTube and find experts that can explain it way better than I can. But in kind of a nutshell, Meshtastic allows you to create a off-grid communications network. It doesn't need cell phone, doesn't need Wi-Fi. All it needs is your phone and a little long-range radio board that you can buy for like 30 bucks. And the Meshtastic app itself is free. So for very little money, you can actually set up your own communications network completely off-grid. Doesn't require any of the network support that using iTac does. iTac is what we talked about on the last video. We talked about some of the positives and negatives of it. So I wanted to be able to talk about some of the positives and negatives of Meshtastic next to that. Now, it's really important to note, Meshtastic has not actually been released in the store yet, in the Apple Store. Since I made my last video, iTac did actually get fully released, so you can now find it in the store. You don't have to find it on test flight anymore, but Meshtastic is still in test flight. So just a heads up on that one, you will have to install test flight to install Meshtastic and to play around with it on the iPhone. We're going to follow the format kind of like we did last time. So I've kind of given you the opener now, and we're going to go. I'm going to walk you through the app itself with screen captures so that you can see it and kind of get an idea. And then we're going to come back here and we're going to talk about some of the positives and negatives and where kind of I think it fits and how it compares with iTac.
Okay, so in our last video we talked a little bit about iTac and some of its uses and some of its functionality. This one we're going to talk about Meshtastic. Now Meshtastic is much simpler even than iTac, but we're going to do the same thing. We're going to walk through each of the individual tabs and kind of what's on them. So first tab that's important is the app settings. So this is where you can set your name. Obviously it shows the radio that you're connected to. Provide location to mesh is if you have a one of the mesh boards that does not have a built-in GPS, you can actually use your device's location. It'll provide it to the board, and then the board will broadcast that. So that's a way to continue to have your location as part broadcast as part of the mesh network, even if you happen to have one of the lower boards that do not have the actual GPS on board. You can also choose the update interval, anywhere from 1 to 15 minutes. That's just how often your phone or device will send your location out. You can change up your keyboard, and then you can change up your map, because again this uses Apple Maps, which the Meshtastic on Android does not use, the like Google Maps for example. You can choose satellite, hybrid, or standard, which you can't do, at least I haven't found out how to do in the standard Meshtastic. And then you can also log all mesh activity for debugging. I don't do that. On the mesh map, you can see here, this is the hybrid map. Gives you the satellite with also the streets and everything overlaid. And here it's just giving you the 2 locations of 2 of the devices on my mesh network. Now, with that said, it's not super accurate because all my devices are literally sitting within 1 feet of each other, and according to this picture, they're 30, 40 feet apart. That I'm indoors right now recording, so the signal is probably a little bit weak. This would improve if I went outside, but that just gives you an idea. Nodes, it just tells you what nodes are currently on your network. Beef is, well, me. Hail is another one of my devices. Bridge is another device. And then Bluetooth tells you what radio you're connected to. You can also scan for other available radios. And then messages. Now, one of the nice things about this message tab as opposed to the Android message tab is you can actually send individual messages. Now, it may be possible to do that in Android, but it's not as obvious or as easy as it is here. And you'll see some of these messages. I was messing around with my kids. They were helping me test this. So I believe it's this one. Yeah, they actually got in a fight, with each other here. But as you can see, this was a conversation between the device I'm recording on and the device labeled Bridge, whereas this one is a device, is a all broadcast. So this is all the devices, all the messages that are talking to each other. Now let me try something real quick, see if I can replicate an issue I had earlier. Go back to settings. And now we'll go back to messages. Okay, there we go. So yeah, so this is one little glitch in this beta version of Meshtastic for iPhone, which I'm going to report and hopefully they'll get it fixed. When you go from your messages tab, if you have a discussion open and then you go to another tab and then back, it disappears like this. So to fix that, you have to go back out and then come back in and all your messages are back. But for whatever reason, when you switch back and forth, the messages disappear. And I mean, it's not a huge deal, obviously, because the messages are still there, but it's annoying when you're switching back and forth between tabs. If you need to troubleshoot something and then come back, it's annoying to then have to take an additional extra step to get that fixed. So I'll report that. As I mentioned earlier, when I was doing my intro, the Meshtastic is not actually available in the Apple Store yet. It is still in test flight, so it is still in beta testing, and so naturally there are going to be some glitches that will hopefully get themselves worked out before the final version is released in the store.
Okay, so now that you've had a chance to look at kind of the app and the screens and stuff, let's talk a little bit about what Meshtastic can and cannot do, and what it kind of where it fits into possibly your plan. We talked a little bit about how Apple apps, we talked about this with iTac, how they're kind of siloed, right? And they don't really work together. One of the big benefits of the Android platform is, for example, I can make ATAC and Meshtastic talk to each other. I can't do that with the Apple platform. iTac and Meshtastic don't talk to each other, at least not at this particular moment. I don't know if anyone's working on that. I honestly have no idea. But with the two of them being completely separate, it kind of raises the question of, where does each fit? So as you can kind of see when we were walking through the different pages, Meshtastic is pretty much good for three things. Within the app itself, it's good for messaging, and it's good for basically blue force tracking. You can see where the other members of your party are. And you can do that, and this is the third thing, you can do that completely off grid. You don't need a cellular or a wireless connection to do that. So just the fact that it's an off-grid communications and blue force tracker is really awesome. Now, the downside to Meshtastic on the iPhone is that because it will not integrate with ATAC or iTAC in the case of the iPhone, you can't send anything else, right? Like I can't send waypoints. I can't send any other information over the mesh network. I can only send my messages, text messages, and I can send my location, and that's it. So it's very limited somewhat in its usefulness because of that. Now, obviously in an off-grid scenario, it's a lot more useful than iTAC, because iTAC in an off-grid scenario, you can't do blue force tracking and you can't even message each other. So if you wanted to use iTAC, but you also wanted to communicate, you would have to have iTAC open to do like your route navigation, and then you would have to switch over to Meshtastic to do your communications. It's possible, right? But it's really annoying on the Apple platform. Whereas with the ATAC and Meshtastic platform, or ATAC and Meshtastic on the Android platform, it's integrated. I can actually do the messaging, the navigating, the route planning, and all that in ATAC and still send it through Meshtastic. So there's a lot of benefits to the siloing that Apple does, but it also in this instance, it really kind of damages the usefulness of both apps because they do work better together for the situational awareness that we are looking for in a disaster scenario. So how do they both kind of fit? Again, iTAC, if you have some sort of network and a server, by the way, you have to have a network and a server. If you have that set up, like I believe after Hurricane Harvey, for example, self-service was still up, right? Because a lot of guys were using the little push-to-talk apps on their phones over the cellular network. So if you still have cellular service and you have that server set up, I would probably go with iTAC because it does have a slight edge in the functionality as far as what you can actually do with the software versus Meshtastic. However, in an off-grid scenario, if your cell service goes down, Meshtastic is obviously the way to go because it's the only way you're actually going to be able to communicate using your phone. No, I'm not totally ignoring radios. Obviously, I can do voice comms, but there are some slight, I would say, enhancements to Meshtastic, like the fact that it's encrypted. So there's that little bit of security in your communications as well on Meshtastic that you're not going to get talking on your Baofeng where everyone can hear you and there's really no way to encrypt it. And yes, I realize that with DMRs and P25s and stuff, you can encrypt. I get that, but I'm saying just stuff that you can buy and legally use right now. Meshtastic has the advantage over just talking over the air because it is encrypted. Meshtastic is also, the mesh network is also self-healing, and you can expand it, and you can also, as you're talking, the boards and the computers do the job of prioritizing and sending the messages, as opposed to someone having to run the radio channel as all these people are trying to talk on it and having to manage the traffic. So Meshtastic, yes, I can grab a Baofeng and talk. Meshtastic does have some advantages in an off-grid scenario over just voice comms on an analog radio. So off-grid, Meshtastic kind of wins. If you have any kind of grid, iTAC is probably going to be slightly more useful. Now, altogether, I love you iPhone users. I've owned an iPhone for years. I literally only switched to Android so I can play with ATAC and Meshtastic, but there is an advantage to being able to make those apps talk to each other. It's way more functional than either iTAC or Meshtastic on the iPhone. If you have the ability to plan ahead and set up your disaster comms ahead of time, my thought is that it's going to be easier and better in the long run for you to go with the Android platform versus the iPhone platform. Now, one thing that is interesting If you do have someone who is using the Android platform and running ATAC with Meshtastic plugged into it, they can still see and track the iPhones that are running Meshtastic because it's all on that mesh network. The network doesn't care what your device is that's connected to it. It'll still send the position, and the position will still feed into ATAC. So you can still Blue Force track with ATAC iPhone users on the Meshtastic network. So there is that kind of slight advantage. I have not played around with trying to message from ATAC to Meshtastic on the iPhone. That's something I need to work on. I've got that on my list of things besides learning how to set up ATAC and ITAC servers. Lots of questions about that. But that's kind of my thoughts and kind of an overview on ITAC with my last video and then Meshtastic with this video for the iPhone. Both have solid points in favor of them, but are very separated by the way that Apple sets up their apps and how their apps interact with each other. So hope this was useful for you. If it was, awesome. Check out our Patreon page because we could use your contributions to continue doing this. If you have questions, please put them in the comments. I will freely admit I am just getting into a lot of this tech stuff. There's a lot for me to learn. My goal is that as I'm getting into this tech stuff, I'm learning that for your average person like me, who's not particularly tech savvy when it comes to some of these slightly more emergent technologies, it's very hard for me to find information. And I'm kind of working off the theory that if it's hard for me to find the information, it's also hard for a lot of other people to find the information. So my goal is to find as much of the information as I can and then put it out into an easily searchable, easily savable format like a PDF, where I can basically send you a PDF and you can set up ATAC, ITAC, Meshtastic, maybe a server, and be able to run your own comms for like a disaster response or other preparedness scenario. So send the questions, and if you want to know it, I'll try to find it, or I'll try to find somewhere where I can direct you to it if it's a level of technical expertise that I'm not going to be able to reach and it's best explained by somebody else. I have no issues doing that because I want you to get the information. So questions, comments, please drop them down below. I do read them, I do respond to them. And I really appreciate, especially in this comms section, all the comments and questions I've got, both people trying to help me out and people also saying, yeah, man, I was wondering about that too. Can you maybe look into some of this stuff? So all good stuff, love to see it. And thank you for watching, and I hope to see you again next time.